this video, we're going to conduct a brief walkthrough of the Voxel workspace in 3D Coat, just sampling a few different tools, and then we will try and finish in the retopple room if we have time in this video. What we want to do is essentially emulate the process of taking a low polygon asset you've created in an external application and sending it to 3D Coat to do some high detail sculpting as well as some texture painting while we're there. Now you may opt to do your UVs as well, and in this case we're not really going to spend a lot of time in the retopology stage because we have this nice low polygon mesh that we can reuse. We're going to bake all the high resolution detail onto this original mesh, and we'll create a few things and we'll retopologize those, but again it's just to sample what you can do in each room. So at that point what we want to do is send it to the paint room where we can inspect the work that has been done or the maps as they've been baked, because we may want to redo it. We may want to check the baking parameters and try it again. So we're going to merge everything to the paint room in 3D Coat. And this is a schematic diagram of what it would typically look like if you're wanting to sculpt. And you can see these bright boxes here that highlight the different sculpting platforms in 3D Coat. You have the Voxel Sculpting environment. You also have your paint room where you have image-based sculpting capability. And then you have low polygon sculpting in the tweak room. This was kind of the legacy sculpting toolset of 3D Coat before Voxels came about. And then Voxels developed even further to be kind of a dual platform environment in itself, because you have voxel volume, volumetric pixels, and then you have surface mode sculpting where volume is not being accounted for. Surface mode, you can actually dynamically subdivide local areas using the live clay tool set. Okay. So you have volume, and then you have just geometry or polygons being pushed around, and you can switch back and forth interchangeably. However, once you start working with live clay and you've dynamically tessellated, it may be best to stay in surface sculpting mode, but nevertheless the tools all exist in the same workspace. So what we want to do is start in their host application, and I'm going to use the AppLink connection plugin that's provided for every major 3D application, as well as ZBrush and Mudbox. And what that does is it allows us a more seamless workflow, so I can send our low polygon model directly to the portion of 3D Coat that I want to work in. Whether it be the paint room, the voxel room, retopo, UV, whatever the case may be, I can send it directly there with my AppLink plugin. You can see the different options I have here. So what we're going to do is send this initial low poly object. I'm going to send it to the retopple room. Okay, and the reason for this is so that I have a low poly version in the application, and I'm going to access this copy from the voxel room. That way I've got a high poly version and a low poly version. The reason why this is important to have both in the application is because there is a relatively new feature in 3D Coat that can save you a ton of time. And how that works is, let's say you have your low polygon mesh here and you get to sculpting on it in the voxel room, and you don't yet have your retopologized mesh, sent to the retopper room and all that. What if while I'm sculpting, I wanted to make some large-scale edits? Maybe I want to change the length of the tail, the orientation, maybe the shape, or just change the silhouette of the object. Maybe I want to push on a character. Maybe I want to push the shoulders out a bit more as I'm sculpting, or maybe shrink the waistline in a bit. So you can do those types of major edits without worrying about having to go back and fix the original low poly mesh as well. Previously you would have to do that. Previously you would have to go in and do a lot of extra work trying to get it to fit to those new changes. In this case, we have a feature that will conform this low poly mesh to the high poly mesh as we're working, and it's, like I said, it's a big time saver. Yeah, let's go ahead and we'll use the conformed retopo mesh feature as we're working, and we'll finish. As we finish up with our sculpt, we'll go into the retopo room. If we don't already have UVs applied from our host application, then we can do them here in the retopo room. At that stage, we can go to the retopo menu and choose to merge to the paint room in whichever mode we choose. Whether we want to use per pixel painting mode, where you're painting on a normal map in the depth channel, or micro vertex, where you're painting a displacement map in the depth channel. And this is the image-based sculpting I'm talking about here. Okay, so let me erase some of this here. All right, so I'm going to bypass p-tex for the moment, and one reason for that is that it somewhat eliminates the ability to work simultaneously in a 3D plus a 2D environment. Okay, these two will allow you to work simultaneously in 3D and a 2D texture editor right there in the viewport. And you can also quickly send layers back and forth to Photoshop as well. If you're using p-tex, it just effectively eliminates the ability to work in 2D. And I believe we've covered that in some depth before in other videos. Okay, so we won't even cover p-tex in this walkthrough. Alright, so I think we've covered everything in enough detail, so let's go ahead and get started here. What I'm going to do is go back to 3D Coat, and I'm just going to use this for reference, but while I do it, in order to save system resources, I'm going to cache these layers. It's going to send this original high poly version to the hard drive, and it's going to leave behind a lower poly version called a proxy. Okay, and you can see this went from above 10 million down to 1 million. And what I did is I went to the voxels. Under proxy visualization, you can set the decimation or reduction level. Okay, and you can also set hotkeys for it by hitting the end key, and it will allow you to set the hotkey. I'm going to hit escape. Let's go ahead and cache these other items as well. Let's go ahead and hide these, and I'm going to start in 3ds Max using my AppLink plugin here. And if I wanted to send this model directly to the paint room, I could do it here. Per pixel painting, micro vertex, or p-tex. I could drop it as a voxel object directly in the voxel room. I could also send a copy as a retopo mesh in 3D Coat, and that's what I'll choose here. So I have the model chosen. I'm going to go ahead and click drop retopo mesh, and you'll notice it takes me directly to that workspace as soon as I click on 3D Coat. So I'll hide this already existing layer in the retopo group, and I'm going to hit enter. It's asking, do I want to snap it to a voxel or reference mesh? In this case, no. Okay, and you can see it created a new layer for me. I can rename it body mesh 2. And so, as you can see, UVs have already been applied. I can see them actually here in the viewport, or in this little UV preview window. I can scale this down if I'm working strictly on the retopo mesh itself, and I can scale this back out when I'm working on UVs. And I have the models palette in here as well. That way I can, if I wanted to use any of the models as a preset for starting a retopology object, I can do that here as well. So let's go ahead. Now that we have this object here in the scene, in the retopple room, what I'm going to do is go to the voxel room and create a new layer in the Vox Tree Layer panel. I'm going to double click and name it Body 02. And I'm going to click on the increase resolution because at that scale it probably needs at least 1 or 2 iterations. So at this stage, all I need to do is go to the Objects subsection here, or I could hit the space bar to bring this tool panel directly to my cursor. Okay, so under the Object section here, I can choose the Merge tool. At the very bottom of the Tool Options panel, I can choose Pick from Retopo, and there you have it. I'll click Center Mask for the gizmo, and I can see it's a bit faceted, so I'm going to subdivide it once or twice. Okay, and then I can scroll to the top of the tool panel and hit Apply or the Enter key. Okay, and you can see it's somewhat filled, and what I'm seeing in white here is this preview object is still in the scene. How you get rid of that is by choosing another tool. The reason why it stays in the scene like this is because 3D Coat assumes you want to continue using a tool until you choose something else. Okay, so I'll choose something else. Now you can see the object I have here. I'm going to go back to the Merge tool and we'll point something out here. You have some options when you're in the Merge tool to actually separate different objects. In other words, if I had teeth, a tongue, and eyes also selected, okay, it would come in different layers in the Retopo group, and it would also separate. I could choose Merge without voxelizing. It would come in as a surface mode object, and I could choose Merge to separate volumes or Merge to separate instances. And what would happen is the teeth and eye and whatnot, those will come in with their own individual layers instead of being merged all into one. Okay, so just wanted to go ahead and point that out. So with that done, we can see our model here. I can scroll all the way to the bottom and choose Smooth All, and I have some options for smoothing. I'll try Relaxing. Let's try 3. Okay. So what I'm going to do at this stage is I'm going to go ahead and proceed to do a little bit of modeling with the Primitives tool and the Curves tool, and I'll just try to comment as I go. I'm going to speed up the playback in order to keep this video as brief as possible. All right, so here we go. We're going to start by creating some new layers, name them appropriately for each object we intend to create. In this case, the teeth, tongue, and the eyes, and I'll also add enough resolution so that they come in okay, then they're not too rough. Now I'm going to use the Curves tool for the tongue, create some points along the path, and I like to go to an orthographic view if I know that the path is going down a specific axis. In this case it is, so I'm clicking on individual points and I can scale them, transform them and whatnot with a gizmo. I can get out of the gizmo by hitting the escape key or right clicking on the node. Once I'm happy with the shape, I can hit apply to commit it. Now I chose the spline stroke draw mode from the E panel and also the crease clay tool in order to create a nice crease right down the middle of the tongue. Here I'm using just a standard cylinder primitive. I'm able to scale one end down to a point. I committed it by hitting apply, and now I'm using the transform tool to move it in place. I switch to the pose tool, and again I like to use an orthographic view so that when I make a selection, that gizmo is oriented straight down that specific axis. If I'm in perspective mode, it might be a bit skewed. Okay, I was able to create an instance and flip it along the y-axis. And for my models palette, I had some teeth that I had already stored, so I'm just reusing those and showing how the kitbashing toolset can help you do tasks like this. You can quickly store teeth that you may have created on another reptile model or dragon model, something like that, and reuse it just to save a little bit of time. I'm creating instances here as well. So I'm just clicking on new instance and then moving the object into place. Okay, we're going to now select an eye that, again, I've already created previously, and I just stored it in the models palette by dragging and dropping the layer directly into the palette. And so I'm just reusing that, position it the way I like. Here I'm just resampling the body using the resample tool toward the bottom of your tool panel. I ghosted the eye so I can see around. I'm just trying to do a little bit of sculpting around the eye socket using the smooth tool by holding the shift key. Okay, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take a copy of the eyeball. I created a layer for the eyelids, and I'm just going to flip the copy 180 degrees. And so what I did here is I'm using the closed spline draw mode here along with the Vox layer, and what I'm going to do is inverting the selection when I hit apply. And so what it's going to do is, as you can see, it's going to basically create everything outside of that shape that I created. And so I'm cheating here. I'm creating an eyelid instead of trying to sculpt one from scratch. This seems like it would take a lot less time in order to get that nice sharp eyelid form exactly where I want it and exactly the shape that I want it. So just kind of smoothing around the edges. Resampled again because I'm going to need a little bit more resolution there in the eye socket area. And I just merged those two together, the eye socket with the regular mesh. And I realize at this point it's still way too low resolution when it was merged, so I'm going to have to go back and increase the resolution here of the body layer. Alright, we'll stop right there and pick up the next video doing some sculpting work and then finishing up with some retopology. Thank you.